That is working now. Thank you for anyone who's early, having to listen to that song about 5 times. I normally give this talk at the party times. I am so glad I wasn't wearing this suit last night. This may look like an expensive suit, but I assure you it's not, and it would have melted on me or set on fire last night. It was far too warm. And I love the people who are chilling out on beanbags, like they're at home watching telly. It's great. Okay, so I can't overrun because that stops you getting food, so I've got to make sure I do this on time. And I assume you've already had your head filled with loads of tech stuff and you've come here to get tech stuff that you don't need to remember as opposed to tech stuff that you do need to remember. So I'm hoping you're going to have fun with this. So I have to give credit to... let me just get the pointer working. Go on. This is where it's not. Right. Why is my keyboard not working? Slideshow. Right, that's it. Got it. Focus was in the wrong place. I'm going to give credit to Rich Campbell for doing Geek Outs, and I nicked his idea, so it's not really giving credit, it's completely stealing an idea to go and do one about TV, because I didn't think he was going to do one about TV, and I did actually kind of chat to him a little bit about it and say, was he okay with it? So, why did I start getting interested in TV? I thought it was because, I ended up falling into TV, kind of getting jobs in it. But it turns out, when I was clearing out the loft at my parents' house, I've got very cheesy video transitions as if it's a 1980s wedding video, by the way. Because remember when page curl was a thing? And people went, yes. Right. I was clearing out the loft at my parents' house, and I found this book. So in the UK, we have Ladybird books for kids. And they used to be ones that taught you how to read, and then there are ones with how we make a car, which is hilarious when you watch it, because how you make a car does not include robots at any point in the one that I've seen. This is how TV works, published in 1968, that has a single page on colour TV saying it's coming. So that's how old this book is. But it gets some really nice artwork for the backgrounds of the slides. And you know it's old because he's watching Speedway on the motorbike, which is hardly there anymore as a sport. It was massive at that point. And he's seeing it in black and white, even though it's really in colour. So that was one of the books I had. And I had another book I found. If anyone has ever shopped at Marks and Spencer for food or clothes, a famous British store, they also had their own books at one point. And this was television magic. How did special effects work? So clearly, apart from the fact that I spent lots of my time watching the 3 TV channels we had when I was a kid, and then got very excited when we got 4, and a new one started, and then even more excited when they started doing breakfast TV, because it only used to come on at midday, and that's as early as you could watch TV in the old days. So I clearly was into it at that point. So I was already reading these books. I did a tiny little bit at college before I went off to university. College was something, in the UK, we had colleges, which were you did exams before you went to university, but if you're American, it's a college before you went to college, which doesn't make any sense. And they had work placements. And one of the work placements I had at university was at the BBC Computer Graphics Workshop in 1990, when the Rome World Cup was happening, Italy's World Cup. I know that because I was next to the edit suite that was editing all the graphics for the World Cup programs, and I heard a song called Nessun Dorma continually for 2 weeks, which was the music they chose to do. And that's me stood in the black on top of the famous building that the BBC used to have in London, where it was illegal for you to go there, and we had to go through a secret door and find out how to get there, and then got told off having gone over there. But after having been there, doing graphics, I then started working for Sky News in the UK, did the first in-house weather system, written in Visual Basic 1.0, right? We did elections, we did sport. I helped launch a breakfast TV company. So I was working in these companies when they were going from analog to digital. So the satellites were broadcasting analog, digital satellite hadn't happened yet. People were moving graphics around in the company on hard disks encased in a little plastic case, and the little case came out, and they put hard disk platters directly into machines, because files are big, and that was about the only thing you could use to get files around. But I wasn't really there before color. But we'll go back, because this is important. How long have we had TV? Only about 100 years. That's quite recent to some extent. It's a combination of Greek and Latin, apparently. So tele meaning far away and visio meaning sight. So God knows why they decided to use two languages no one uses anymore and stick them together. And this guy in England, although he was Scottish, created a way of doing the first TV pictures. So he did 30 vertical lines broadcast from one room to another, and that was the first time that television had ever happened, and sent a picture down wires. And then he put sound on it, because it's quite important to do sound at that point, because I'd realized that from the movies, because no one watched silent movies anymore. But the official launch was done by the BBC in November 1936. And they have two rival systems. One of them was done by Logie Baird, and that was electromechanical. This actually genuinely had mechanical components spinning in order to capture the light at the right point. Almost like a film projector is actually a mechanical device. So he was building on top of that. But there was this company called EMI. Now, anyone heard of EMI as a record label? Probably, yeah. So at that point, they were Electric and Musical Industries, was their official name. So they were making anything that had electronics in it, and they made a completely electronic version of the system. Even then, the BBC wanted to be impartial and not favour someone because it's a state broadcaster. So one week they broadcast with the mechanical system, and the next week they broadcast with the electronic system. And they did that for quite a few months, getting more and more pissed off by the mechanical system that kept breaking, right? And then they gave up. So it didn't last very long. And then they did 405 lines, so 405 lines on a black and white TV, and they kept that going for nearly 50 years. And they were still broadcasting that system 50 years later. That's how advanced it was at the time. So how do these electronic cameras work? We didn't have semiconductors. There's no semiconductors. There's valves. There's not even transistors at this point. So how on earth do you get it to work? So what you do is the camera has light coming in, and it falls on this sensitive plate, a mosaic it was called, and it was covered in cesium. And the cesium, bit of physics, because I did do physics, gets excited by the light and kind of has electrons ready to jiggle and go away from it, but they're a bit nervous, and they won't actually cause a current to flow. So they said, how do we get these electrons that are willing to pop off and tell you how bright it is? Well, you get an electric gun, which is a metal plate heated so it starts spitting out electrons, move the electrons with a magnet and get them to hit the mosaic plate, and that gives enough extra energy to these electrons for them to escape, and you can measure it, and you amplify it, and you do loads of other complicated stuff, but you can now get the cesium to give up its electrons, and that tells you how bright it is. So how does this look as a kind of picture? And this is the classic Lady Bird book. And you can tell it's from the 60s because it's just got a woman presenter, obviously not a man at that point. So here you have it, this electron gun, and the deflector coils are magnets. Now, electrons are negatively charged, so they're magnetic. So you can use magnets to move the electrons around. And that's how they used to sweep all across the mosaic, shown here by the woman's picture upside down, because everyone knows that cameras take pictures upside down, and we have to switch them the right way up. So they come in, and it amplifies it. Notice it only has lines. doesn't have a horizontal resolution, it only has a vertical resolution. So the actual horizontal bit is a continuous analog stream of brightness, not actual genuine pixels. And every time it got to the end of a line, it had to stop sending electrons for a little bit, the magnets pull back, and then do the next line. And when it gets to the bottom, it takes even longer to go all the way back to the top to get those magnets. So it's quite a complicated kind of system, you know. Someone was smoking something. Opium in their days, clearly, because it wouldn't be pot at that point. So how, if you're going to have this to do black and white, would you do color? And you go, how am I going to make a sensitive material that only works with red or blue or green or whatever like that? And the actual answer is, they only do brightness, but it's fine, because what you do is you get a prism, you split the color into red, green, and blue, and you actually have 3 entire of those tubes inside a camera. And one of them does red, one does green, one does blue, and they just only have that element of the spectrum hitting them, which makes them quite expensive. Now, one of the things I noticed when I was getting pictures was old-fashioned cameras like this. Those aren't the red, green, and blue being separated. Unbelievably, when you were doing sport and you needed a really long shot of someone playing football on a football pitch, they rotate the lenses completely on the front of the camera to go for a long shot. So they couldn't actually adjust focal length that easily. They just rotated entire lenses around. So, weird thing. But we don't use vacuum tubes anymore like that. We don't use these photo television guns. We use CCDs. These are charged coupled devices. So these are semiconductors, which kind of work in a similar sense in that light falls onto the semiconductor, it gets excited, it starts freeing up electrons. You then have to go through and read the electrons from each little part of the CCD, and that gives you a brightness level. And then you reset it to be 0 again for the next time you need to get a value out of it. And there's a filter layer. So again, this only does brightness. It does not do color. Your CCDs do not do color. They just know about brightness. So one of the popular filters, which is shown here, is the Bayer filter, unbelievably invented and patented by someone at Kodak, and then they didn't make cameras with it. And that's why Kodak's tiny, because they kept the film in. They decided that film was the future of cameras, not digital. Unbelievably, I read the other day that film sales are going up because for some reason, there are young people who believe a film camera is a good way of taking photos. I tell you now, you take photos, you know the first 3 are probably going to be washed out because you cocked up putting the film in the camera, and the rest of them, you hope you got the focus and exposure correct, and you probably didn't, and there's a wobbly shot, and then someone in the background has gone photobomb, and you don't find out for about 4 weeks after you've been on holiday that all of your shots were rubbish. So please don't go back to film, is my advice. So this guy invented the Bayer filter, and each square has 1 red, 1 blue, and 2 green. And it's green because the eye is really odd on how it perceives things. So inside your eye, you have blue cones, red cones, and you have green. And the green sensors are odd because, obviously, if you go out into nature, not now, because we've built all over it, so it's not quite the same, there's a huge amount of green. So green is oversensitive type level. So our eye is adapted to look better for red and blues than the greens because there's too much green anyway. So they have to compensate with all this on the filters, on things like CCDs. And when you get a professional TV camera, inside your normal cameras, this is just one semiconductor with the little filters on it. Professionals, you still use a prism and you go to 3 different semiconductors, no filters. Because every time you put filters in front of light, you're cutting out some of the light. So you're stopping some light getting through. So if you can not have filters, you get 100% of the light hitting the semiconductor. You get a much clearer, better, crisper signal. How do red, blue, and green combine? Well, it's this classic suit. It's the test pattern. So when you get 100% red, blue, and green, you get white. If you get no red, blue, and green, you get black. Pure blue, pure red. The magenta is red and blue, 100%. Pure green. Cyan, I'd say, is blue and green together, 100%. And the yellow is the red and green, I think. I can never remember, and I'm slightly colorblind. So when I get pure colors like this, and I worked in computer graphics, doing graphics for TV, and I never told them I was colorblind. The green and yellow look really similar on a high-end broadcast monitor. So that's how we sample TV. We get red, we get blues, we get greens. We do it in lines going down. How did you show them? Well, the guys who did the TV tubes obviously went, yeah, we just do the same kind of crap, but at home. Right? That's what we're going to do. We're going to have this big glass tube, and instead of having a layer that detects light hitting it, and we read from it, we're going to blast electrons at the screen. So you have blue, green, and red electron guns. They have magnets controlling where the electrons go. And then they have to go through this shadow mask. So in the entire TV, there's an entire kind of foil with little holes in it that allow the beams to go through and hit the right pixels and stop any bleed through so that a bit of the blue signal doesn't end up on the red, making it look smudgy. So this was invented by a US company. And that's how you get it. And this thing is switching magnets all the time, scanning 60 times a second from top to bottom, flicking back. It's impressive it works. The other thing, this was a discussion about someone's child, Magnus Martinson, has just gone through her third 4K TV by throwing stuff at it. The one advantage of CRTs, if you throw stuff at them, they don't break. Like, genuinely. I've seen them get rid of them at a shop that was outside my school when I was young, and they had to hit them with sledgehammers to try and smash them up. They're that solid at the front because they were so worried about them exploding in people's houses. They were so safe. Now, given that we have that situation with red, green, and blue and these electron guns, I played a game on a BBC microcomputer, so home computer game when I was a child. And it was called Thrust. And it was this little spaceship, and it had it started out easy. It was a bit like asteroids. You just moved through a maze. You blew up the fuel thing to get more fuel. You blew up those little, I don't know what they call it, those little kind of, looks like a game controller that used to fire at you and try and kill you. So you blow everything up, and then they said, that's not hard enough. We'll put this weight at the bottom like a pendulum. So now as you go around a corner, it swings you out, and you have to then cope with it. And it was a physicist who wrote this, so he was really good at momentum and gravity. And he decided it wasn't hard enough even then, so he was going to reverse gravity, right? So suddenly, you were dragged up the screen instead of being dragged down the screen. You'd probably played this game for days, got to that point, and now your mind's going. And obviously, being a computer person and having a square monitor, which is what they look like, what I did was turn the monitor upside down. So you just turn that upside down because it's flat, so you can easily go, right? And now gravity's the right way. The interesting thing is, when you do that, all the colors change. Because now the electrons aren't hitting the right colors on the screen because they're going down, and the magnets have stopped doing what they thought they were going to do and are moving things to the wrong bits of the screen. They're also hitting the shadow mask. So these little electrons are hitting that whole big metal grill in front. They're missing the holes and actually hitting it. They're causing that to be slightly magnetic. So then, 2 hours of playing this, you go, I better put it the right way up. and the colors are still wrong. And I go, I've broken it, right? But what it does is it takes about a day for the magnetism to drift away, and then all the colors come back like normal, right? Did anyone have a button on a CRT monitor called the degauss button? Yes. And you used to press it, and the whole thing went boom. That was removing the magnetism from the mask on your monitor to allow the electrons to go through the correct holes again. That's its whole job, was to do that, to make the colors accurate again. So if you were into your music and you put your hi-fi speakers next to your CRT, and the hi-fi speakers have decent magnets in, you had to press that button quite a lot, because it tended to move the beams a bit. But yes, so this was an invention that allowed you to obviously get to the right bits of phosphor on the screen. It was licensed by RCA, a company in America, yet another record company that happened to make things, electronic things as well. And Sony wasn't that happy that it was being charged for a patent and a license for this stuff. So they thought, we've got to do better. And what they did was they decided, instead of having dots in little patterns, they would just have vertical stripes of phosphor all the way down the screen, right? But that would obviously cause a bit of bleed across. So then they put the incredible finest wires between the band's lines of phosphor. And this meant they had twice the luminance coming off these devices, because there was so much more phosphor visible. And remember I said that the vertical lines don't matter because it was going through. A little bleed from one line to another didn't matter in this case. It was bleed from one color to another was the thing that was going to kill you. And those lines were so fine, the wires were so fine, that on the bigger monitors, they had to put horizontal wires across. And especially on the broadcast monitors you used in television. The annoying thing with that is once someone tells you there's two tiny horizontal wires across your TV, you will never unsee them again. Right? So, really annoying. And it won an Emmy Award, because there is an Emmy Award for technical achievement in television and film, and this was given the award. And if you ever had a Mitsubishi monitor, they called it Diamondtron, but it was like licensed from them. So all the high-end CRT monitors before TFTs came in were all based on Trinitron designs. And apparently those monitors are now worth a fortune for gamers to use, because they really like how the phosphor has a delay and makes it actually a much smoother movement when they're playing games than a TFT. But no one makes them anymore, really. So there's only whatever was made, and hope they don't break, because they have loads of electronic components in them. So yeah, so that's how we get to see stuff on the CRTs. I'm going to go into LCDs at the moment, but I've got to do one bit of physics before we can talk about flat screens. We've got to talk about polarization, because this is key to how it all works. So, I've got a very boring definition, but I'm not going to reword a real definition. So, polarization, the action of restricting the vibrations of a transverse wave, especially light, wholly or partially to one direction. Oh, it's more easy to describe when you've got a skipping rope going to a tree, right? So if you attached a skipping rope to a tree and you just went like this, you'll eventually, if you're really good and careful, you get this sine wave going. And the skipping rope will just bounce and bounce and bounce. Now, what if in front of that tree you put up a piece of wood and cut a vertical slot in it? Right? So you imagine a big piece of wood, a slot, almost like a doorway, but quite narrow. Now you can do the skipping rope. It still works, right? Because it can get through the slot. But if you now do the skipping rope horizontally, it can't get through. It'll just bash into the wood and sag. So this is polarization. Polarization is saying we are going to limit whatever signal coming, light, radio waves. Light is a radio wave, it's an electromagnetic wave, and we're just going to get it to one kind of axis and make it pure. By the way, this is used in sunglasses with polarization. And has anyone ever got sunglasses with polarization, then looked at your GPS device or nav and seen a blank screen? Is because your glasses are at a different polarization angle to your screen, and you now can't see it. So polarization on a sunglasses is to cut out half the light for you. And that's how it works. It just stops all the horizontal and keeps all the vertical, or the other way around. So this is polarization at its heart, a skipping rope on a tree. Hold that in your head. So liquid crystal displays on your laptop or phone, these are not the OLED displays. It's really important that the OLED displays work differently, and we're going to cover them. So this is liquid crystal. And this is amazing. This is one of the most ingenious things ever made in my head. So they have a backlight at the back of the screen. You sometimes see it kind of light at the sides, and it bleeds across a bit. So that backline shines through one layer of glass with polarization, liquid crystals in the middle, and another plane of glass. If you didn't have the liquid crystal, one plane of glass is like that, one's like that, no light gets through, so it would be black. So instead, you have this liquid crystal in the middle, genuinely mechanically moving bits of crystal sandwiched between the glass. One bit of glass has vertical wires, effectively, and the other bit has horizontal. When you put a current at that exact point, the crystals can twist. When they twist, they change the polarization of the light coming through. So now, that back glass was like this, the front one's like this, and in the middle, we've got crystal untwisting and making the light bend sideways and now can come out. So now, you can get the light out to the person who's looking at the screen. It's black and white initially. That was what was on calculators and digital watches. And it was pretty much 2-3 layers of gray, not huge amount of variation. They improved it, and they put little red, green, and blue filters on the outside glass to make the light that was always pretty much white end up being red, green, and blue. You twist the crystal a certain amount with different voltages, and you can make it have different levels of brightness. Now you get to 0 to 255 for red, green, and blue on the screen. So when you are looking at a HD or 4K TFT that is based on liquid crystal technology, you are watching every 60 times a second, or 100 if you've got a really fast refresh rate, every pixel twiddling bits of real mechanical crystal at every single pixel. Right? If the electric lines break, you get dead pixels. They're either stuck on white, or they're white, or they can be black if it really cocks up. But have you ever had a stuck pixel where you saw one and you rubbed the screen and it went away? Did anyone ever have that? And there's little tools that you can do that you can rub the screen, and suddenly this one bright dot disappears and it starts working again. You have actually physically nudged the crystal to get it back into the mode where it can twist with the electric current. So that is an amazing, right? That's really complex stuff, and it's mechanical, not electronic. So we're almost back to Baird doing mechanical stuff. He'd be happy. Now, the nicer screens are called OLED, light-emitting diodes. So these are nicer, and these are the ones that are on the higher-end phones as well. So these don't have a backlight. There's no big white light at the back trying to shine through stuff. They just glow. And they glow white, or very bright blue is generally what LEDs. A white LED is just really, really, really bright blue, just like, and I don't know if you knew this, that all your black jeans are just very, very, very dark blue. They're not black. And if you wash black jeans, you will see blue come out if you dilute it enough. So it's the same theory, is bright white, so we put color filters in front. And those color filters turn them into red, green, and blue. But we have no mechanical moving crystals, and we haven't got that situation where we took this light and halved how much got through before we'd even thought about it. So it's much more energy efficient as well, because we're only giving light where it's needed, and not going, we're just blocking lots of the light. The really interesting bit is Samsung have Super AMOLEDs with a pentile. When they say dots per inch, they're not necessarily the dots per inch that you might think. There are not definitely those dots per inch doing red, green, and blue. They do all sorts of tricks where they have more green. They have double the amount of green to blue and red. So you can zoom in on these, and these are electron or microscopes looking at the screens. You can see how they've jiggled all the pixels around. And this is all, again, utilizing the fact that our vision processing handles green differently to red and blue, and you can get away with less pixels, but you'll think it's got more pixels. So all that dots per inch that you get told, kind of, it's interpolated. So that's how we get the nice modern phones now. The reason, and nice modern TVs, but they cost a lot of money. And the one problem we have with OLEDs, and I had a Samsung Galaxy 9 for 3 years, is they burn in, unlike TFTs. So you can see where all your icons were on the home screen after about 3 years on other apps. So they're not that nice a thing. The screensavers can't do the job that they used to do on CRTs, because CRTs had the same problem with, oh my God, the Windows logo is now always on my screen, whether it's on or not. All right, same kind of idea. So there are disadvantages, but the advantages are so much greater. Much deeper blacks, because there's no light leaking out, much more vivid colors, more energy efficient, much nicer. Someone may have noticed I've skipped a TV technology called plasma. Plasma was a dead end. It was the Betamax. It was the Philips V2000 tape format, right? It was mini disc, right? And the one advantage you had with plasma was if your cooker stopped working, you could put the screen flat and fry your breakfast on it, because it got super hot. I mean, ludicrously hot. So they don't get put into your phones, so I didn't deal with that. So we've talked about how we've captured, we've talked about how we're displaying stuff. I think it's nice to do a bit about how video actually kind of really works on that scanning. Because I don't know if anyone, if you do science lessons, and you do them at a junior school, lower level, and they say, this is how everything works. And then you go to the next school and they go, that's not how it works, this is how it works, right? And then you go to the next level and go, oh no, that's not how it works completely differently to that. So I said, you just scan it with an electron gun. No, that's not how they did it. So I'm going to talk about fields and frames. This is a crap dad joke, that's a field, that's a frame on my bike after it hit a car, and I went over the bonnet. So, but that's not what I'm talking about video. So, for video, a frame is a complete, full image on the screen. Fields are every other line in the image, and that's called interlacing. You would have, if you're old enough, you used to have interlaced modes on your computer monitor, and they were rubbish. And they were rubbish because every time you had a single horizontal line, it flickered, and you could see it move. And then they had to invent ClearType, Microsoft Increment font anti-aliasing, to hide the fact that it was a bit jaggy. Here's the thing, is if you actually were capturing, and in this case, US television happens to capture 30 frames a second, and in EU it's 25, all based on the frequency of our power supply, right? That's what that's locked to. If you do show 30 full frames, one after the other, it looks a bit jerky, right? You don't get the smooth movement. If you only do the even odd lines first, scan, and then half a frame later do the even lines, and then you keep doing that, you're now getting movement 60 times a second in the US or 50 times a second in the EU. So now your eye starts going, oh, I can work this out. I'll just blend it all in. And it looks like a much better moving image than if you just did whole pictures. That's why your monitors for doing gaming want to be 100 hertz or something like that, because that gets the smooth movement that you won't get when you drop lower. So, and you used to pause videotapes, and if you paused a VHS videotape, people danced like this. And it's because half of them were about a 1/30th of a second later than the other one. Films do completely mad-ass shit, right? They're 24 frames, no fields, because they work off film negatives. So their cameras go, boom, take a photo, close the lens, move it one up. Take a photo, close the lens, move it one up. And then when they play it back, they go, here's the picture, shutter, move it, show it. Shutter, move it, show it in the cinema. Which means for a third of your time in the cinema, you're looking at a blank screen. Right? It has not got images on it, but your eye is happily sorting it, your brain is sorting it all out and going, yeah, that's fine, whatever. I suggest you don't go to the cinema, can I have a third of my money back because you showed me a blank screen? Right? Because it won't work. The US got there first. And just like mobile, they did it badly. Right? We all know that because if you were in the US and you wanted to go to the rest of the world, your phones didn't work, but GSM did. They did the same thing with video, but they did get there first. There is a joke that NTSC stands for never twice the same color. If you watched US comedies like Cheers on EU TV, it always looked like the colors are wrong. They're really oversaturated. Right. And it's because they got there first. By the way, whoever did this album isn't American because they spelt color correctly with a U. Right? But NTSC stands for, and I've got to look at my notes, National Television System Committee. So they created the first standard, and they said, hey, we're going to do this. And then the Europeans went, all right, we've got to do something. We're going to do it differently. We're going to learn from the errors. And it took about another 10 years before we created the standard in the EU called phase alternating line. So we did a more engineering name for it, rather than naming it after ourselves, the guys who created it. And we put in color correction. That's why our color looks a bit better. So, as I said, in America, they do this thing where they do 60 frames, 60 fields a second, and we do the 50. So, what are the real differences? So, someone, Kendall Miller, who's in the audience in London, before I even did this, said, it's not 30, it's 29.97 frames. I'm like, okay, fine. So, they have 525 scan lines. PAL has 625. Why is there a difference? If you were using the same bandwidth, but you have less frames, you can make more lines in the same frequency, if you think about it. So you can put more data, you can have more lines and use the exact same amount of kind of radio frequency. There is missing lines that you might see, and that's because early TVs have more of a problem than modern ones of getting the electron gun back to the top. So they have to turn it off, they get it to the top, and you're still broadcasting part of the signal. The interesting bit was if you had an old TV that was getting a bit old and weary, and you adjusted the little buttons on the back to make it squidge a screen, but it came in enough, you'd see little white dots at the top flicking across. That was the text service being sent down the lines that were never meant to be shown because the TV's not meant to be showing this bit, those 25 lines. So that's how they managed to put the digital text into TV and the subtitles. They put it on this bit that was never meant to be used because the electron gun was coming back. The other notable bit is NTSC's format is why we had the original VGA being 640 by 480 by 60 hertz, because it pretty much was an NTSC television signal at the time, and it meant your computer monitors were just based on the TV screens that you already had, which is quite a smart move until you're in the UK, and then it's, yeah, that's not what we do. Now, thinking about this. Yeah, so there's one format. Is anyone from France? And what's your format? Do you know? CCAM. So CCAM was invented by the French to protect Thomson Electronics making TV sets in France, and for no other reason. Because in the entire TV industry, everyone used PAL, and at the last minute they went, we'll broadcast this in CCAM, we're only licensing this to French companies at the time. It's typically French. It's why Thomson still exists as a TV electronics company, and we don't have them anymore in the same way in the UK. So there is a reason it works. Telecine. So remember I said that films are 24 frames a second, and a lot of content quite a bit of content on TV is kind of films, or could have come from film-based things, and even the TV programs were filmed on film, rather than videoed on tape. It's an awful use of verbs and nouns. Now, 24 frames a second, the problem with NTSC TV is they were doing 30. How do you get 30 frames into 24? They had to do this absolute batshit crazy stuff, right, to make it work. So they said, for every original cell on the film, number A, we'll just put it back out to video. For B, yeah, we'll just send that out to video as well. We'll send that out. Then we go, well, actually, when we get to C, we'll use the odd lines from B and the even lines from C and send that out. And then for the next line, D, we'll do the odd lines from C, the even from D, push that out, and D gets its own. And that pretty much solves the problem, right? And make sure your vision processing just handles all the fact that now you've got really weird stuff happening. PAL is a bit trickier, because PAL was 25 frames per second. That's really close, so it makes it harder to do this shit, right? And I genuinely tell you, if you look at some DVDs, you will find that the runtime of a European film is 4% shorter than the US film, because they just speeded it up. Because the solution to doing a film is speed it up to 25 frames a second and put it out as PAL. And slightly adjust the audio so it doesn't go squeaky. So you can genuinely look at runtimes of DVDs and find they're shorter in the EU if they're on PAL. So that's how they got films into video, but that was kind of more for broadcast, and they had these machines where they'd be running the film and live filming it, doing all this and sending it out to air. But they needed a format where, let's have something which isn't videotape, let's go digital. And this is where the Moving Pictures Expert Group came in, MPEG. Obviously, they were built on top of the Joint Photographic Experts Group, which we all know is JPEG. And that was the one where they realized that if you get an image of most things, not this suit, most things, say that top, most of it's the same color, we can just put a big blob of purple or black or whatever. So you can do that, and JPEGs use exactly that way of squishing an image down. So they're really good with real-world photographs, awful with fine-line detailed graphics. That's why I use a PNG, because it works differently. So what they went was, well, if we've got this thing that can squish images down successfully, why don't we use a similar concept in order to squish video down? But video, if we just did a JPEG for every frame, we're not squishing it enough. It's not going to work, right? So instead, we will also say, this frame and this one, what's the difference? Only this little bit will only encode that bit, and put that into the file. And then the next one, what's changed again, we'll put that in. So it works like that, and it goes dum, dum, dum. When they did this, MPEG-1, which you go, why did they do that? 'Cause it's awful quality. It was the speed of a CD-ROM drive at the time. A single-speed CD-ROM drive could just about cope with delivering MPEG-1. It took DVD players and faster CD-ROMs to get up to a bit rate off the disk where you could start playing it properly. And then they improved the audio as well, and you've got digital things, AAC and surround sound and all sorts of things started coming in. For those who said in maths, no one will ever use Fourier transforms, I don't understand why we're being taught them. This will never be useful in any life. That's how it all works. That's how your MP3 files work. That's how loads of stuff works. That is how a DVD player puts stuff on the actual disk as well. It has to do really clever stuff with this thing. So it is useful, you just never needed it. But you use it all the time, is the interesting bit. And MP3 is just a shorthand for MPEG-1 audio layer 3. That's where MP3 comes from. So it was designed to go with MPEG-1. The other interesting bit is, and it's a really interesting thing, the specification only told you how you had to decode the files, not how you encode. So you could get as crazy as you wanted with how you encoded stuff. We only specified the decoder. That's why when the Matrix DVD came out, some DVD players couldn't play it because they'd been so clever with how much encoding they'd done and how fine they'd got it and isolated the areas that needed to be encoded more, that although the data rate was okay for coming off a disk, the chips couldn't handle the processing required to decode it. So you had to buy certain DVD players to play the original Matrix DVD. Solved now, they're just, every player does it. The other thing is, having talked about red, green, and blue all this time, it doesn't even use red, green, blue. It uses a 422 color scheme with luminance, chrominance, and so it's using the fact that your vision cares about luminance more than color. If it didn't care about luminance more than color, certain things wouldn't work. Like you wouldn't have been able to watch black and white movies or black and white TV because you'd have lost so much information. So clearly it works. And at night you don't get a lot of color, and yet we can still see. Oh, and dogs cope without color completely. So, but then they sniff each other's bottoms. So leave them alone. So you don't really notice, and you now have only 2/3 the amount of data that you need to store and compress and move around, which is quite cool. So I said that MPEG has this concept of the difference between one image and the next, and that's how it kind of works. So what you get is a group of pictures called a GOP. And you get an iframe, and the iframe is a complete JPEG image. Think of it like that. The next one, P, predictive, says, that's the iframe, here's the bit that's changed. If you add this to that iframe, you get the next frame. And then it probably has another one that says, if I start with that iframe, add this, and then add this, I get to where it is on the third frame. At some point, it starts flipping around to, oh, that iframe over there will start coming this way, because so much has changed this way that it's actually more efficient to start going the other way. So you get these B frames, I frames, P frames. Could you have a GOP of 100? Yes, you could theoretically have that. If you did that when you were trying to go through your DVD, your film, and jump to a spot, it has to load everything to be able to get to that point on the DVD. So it's not a good idea. So how does this look like in practice? This diagram, once I looked at it for 5 minutes, it made complete sense. So I could understand what it was all about. But giving you a better example, and the hard bit of this is normally the only time you ever really see this is when something's gone wrong, either at the encoder or the satellite dish has got a bad signal, or the digital signal on your aerial's got a bad signal. Doesn't happen with cable, so in Europe, loads of people are on cable. You wouldn't have a problem here. So how could I recreate this? And I was struggling, and I looked at things, and I was trying to get frames from video that showed blockiness because the movement was too fast. The worst thing you can do, by the way, is broadcast a football match on a Friday night in fog and try and encode it for a satellite, because it doesn't work, right? Because there's too much movement all the time, and everything just goes fuzzy. So I downloaded a program onto my Surface Go using BBC iPlayer, which is a download tool that they had, they've stopped supporting now. And I stupidly set the storage to the SD card, and the SD card isn't that fast. And then I looked at the SD card to get another file off it, and then I saw this. So I recreated what would happen if you lose those iframes and start just relying on the P frames and the B frames. So have a look at this. So it's a nice interview. It'll be low bandwidth because they're just talking heads, and data loss. And there's the thing that was different. So all we saw was her eyes, because that was the only thing that was properly moving on the image. So we've got to see how MPEG really works. Look at that. It's cool, isn't it? I'm going to do it one more time, because, you know. The audio keeps working because it's sensible enough to not skip audio, but it'll drop video that it can't handle, a playback. It will always try and drop the video but keep the audio. But there you are. So that's a very clear example of how those P frames and B frames are all working in the background. Fortunately, you don't see it much, so you get away with it. So having said all that, I'm now going to do an example of Sky in the UK uses satellite dishes to transmit most of its stuff. They're starting to move for IP delivery. So they're going away from dishes. Dishes are expensive. You've got to put it up on someone's house. You've got to have a satellite over there. Now the broadband networks can cope with the amount of data you're pushing around, so they're trying to get rid of them. But I'm going to have a demonstration of what happens if you had a digital satellite. So this will happen in a Canal Plus box. Sky Digital, I don't know, does anyone have digital satellite? Anyone? Only a handful, you see, because it's Europe, you're on cable. Because you're sensible, you put wires in the ground instead of sticking dishes on houses. Right. The cable box does similar stuff. There's one bit it won't do. So that dish has this thing called a low noise block down converter. I had to look it up. I only know it as an LNB. Right? That's what I've always known it as. And that bit at the middle is trying to collect all the signal from the satellite, hits that dish. The dish is kind of concave, and it focuses it onto that LNB. And it's microwave signals at this point. It's coming on. Polarization comes in again, and I think they even use this on cable because they can do that down the wires. You could put, say, for a given frequency, you can put 8, 10 channels down this frequency. But the smart move is you put 8 and 10 channels going like that, and 8 and 10 channels going like that on the same frequency. And all you have to do is say, we will block the other one. So all satellite information, when you look at tuning, has a horizontal or vertical polarization. In the old days, that LNB had a moving magnet that used to physically move inside it to get the right polarization. But now it's electronic. So the set-top box says, oh, for that channel, you need vertical. And then it says, although it's digital satellite, it's an analog tuner. All your phones have analog circuitry in. That's what gets the signal from the base station. Only once it's tuned analog signals will it start unpacking it as digital. And those, in all the TV systems, and it happens on cable, which is DVB-C, DVB-T is on an aerial, and DVB-S is satellite. They pack a load of channels into one big frequency, and you unpack it, and you go, where's the EPG information for now and next? Where's the EPG information for all the channels? Where's my channel list? Here's the bit that is this channel. This channel also has multiple audio tracks and subtitles in it, and I have to extract them. And, oh, we've got a GOP. So now, it means we might be 12 seconds away from the next iframe. Right, that kind of thing. So when you tune a channel on cable or satellite, right? So cable, you don't have to do the polarization, so you're fine, I don't think. I can't swear on that. It might have it kind of in the tuners. But then it's got to analog tune, get the right frequency, finds the multiplex, starts ripping that out as digital, DVB-C if it was cable, to get the multiplex metadata, find out where the actual channel really is, where its video stream is, where its audio, where its subtitles are. Start decoding, start unpacking it and getting the stream that's just video, and then wait for the GOP to happen. And that's why when you try and change a channel on a set-top box, it takes nearly a second, because I've been really kind to it with that. But it's nearly a second before you get to see the program properly pop up, because it's doing loads of stuff, right? Analog, it's for the dish, it's sending voltages out to the satellite to make the electronics work in the dish. So all of that happens, and pretty impressive, to be honest, that it all works in my head. And the chances are, in your cable systems, you have multiple audio tracks in a way that we only ever get English and audio described. That's what we'll get. Whereas you're much more likely to get multiple languages in Europe. And all that just gets fed as different streams into the box and stuff. So yes, so that's how your satellite and cable box is tuned. And that's where I'm going to leave it for a geek out of television video, because that takes it to pretty much how it got on your phone, how it gets on your laptop. I've missed out how tape recorders work, VCRs, but no one uses them anymore, so it doesn't really matter. But just imagine, in that 100 years, we've invented vacuum tubes, we've got CCDs, we've got fast Fourier transforms. All of this has allowed you to watch a kitten falling off a table and splatting on the floor. Right? So, thank you, and good afternoon. Oh, and remember, there are only green cards. Only green, right? Mm-hmm.